Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Missing Frames. This is the podcast where we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our lives. I'm your host, Shawn Eastridge. We're hanging out on the Nerd Party Network, a collection of podcasts dedicated to all things entertainment. Check us out at thenerdparty.com and make sure you're following us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party and on Facebook and Instagram at The Nerd Party. I'm delighted to welcome back one Mr. John Mills after a long hiatus, back in time for the spooky season. John, what a pleasure. What a joy to see your face.
Can I possibly hope to attain the same heights that your show achieved with the watch of Hocus Pocus 2?
Never.
Only time will tell.
The answer is never.
not hard. That's big shoes to fill, and your guests, that really just a top-notch episode there. So.
Well, thank you so much. I think we can potentially give that a run for its money. I think we've got a good pick here, which is a film neither of us have seen. Actually, technically you've seen it, but it's been years, so I don't know. This is a missing frames for you. We can say that.
Oh, it's definitely a missing frames, but there is one scene, one moment in this movie in particular that I remember seeing on television as a child. It was not even at my house. It was at somebody else's house where it was airing on TV or they had it on videotape or something like that. And it is a very specific moment. I won't spoil it for you because I know that it has something to do with something. I'll tell you what it is after we watch it.
I do want to hear all about it in part 2.
We will talk all about it in part 2, but I remember that moment and I was super young and I remember it scared the hell out of me. Like when I was a kid, all I remember is this one moment and that it scared me. And so there's almost like this mental block of maybe the reason I've never watched it is because young John was like, I don't want to go back to it.
So this has been something that, and I don't even think we've said that. It's John Carpenter's The Fog, which, I mean, whoever's listening, you've seen it, you know the title of the episode, that's what we're watching. But I mean, I was surprised when you told me you hadn't seen it. It's a funny story to hear. I'm sure, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are films where it's the same for me, where I'm like, I have this scarring moment as a kid watching this thing and then never going to it or just staying away from it. I think one of the ones I can think of is Ghostbusters, which I obviously have embraced in the years since, but I was completely horrified by it as a child. And then when I'd heard other people talking about it when I was a little bit older and they were like, oh my God, one of the funniest movies ever made. I was like, Ghostbusters is a comedy? And then I look it up and I'm like, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis. Yeah, of course it's a comedy. And I watched it. Yeah. I'm like, this is hilarious. But it was one of those films that I was nervous about revisiting because I had this traumatizing memory in my head. But because you're such a big John Carpenter fan, I was surprised that this is something you haven't returned to or never felt the need to return to.
I just can't explain it. I really can't explain it because I have friends who love this movie, other Carpenter fans, like Joey's been on the show. We talked about Twin Peaks with him. It's like one of his favorite horror movies and stuff like that. And that's high praise from Joey because he's a very harsh horror critic in his own right. But he loves it and he's totally down with it. And when I told him, hey, I might finally watch it, he was excited. He says hello, by the way. And
hey, Joey.
Yeah, but it is a marvel that I haven't. It really is because I am a huge Carpenter fan, specifically of this era of Carpenter. And I think what it is sometimes with our rewatchability ruts that we get into, I love Halloween. It's one of my favorite movies. I love Escape from New York. I love They Live. I love The Thing. I love Big Trouble in Little China. I enjoyed Prince of Darkness. And it's just somehow The Fog just slipped by because when I think Carpenter, I go and I just, put on one of those things.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, you know what? I want to watch They Live again, or I want to watch Big Trouble in Little China. And it's that weird mental lift that you put yourself in where it's like, oh, I could watch The Fog. Yeah, I don't want to watch something new tonight. And that's just basically what it is.
That's what's crazy about it is you have pretty steep competition as far as his filmography, and especially horror films. Like, we're talking about landmark game-changing films that are masterpieces of the genre and just masterpieces of cinema in general. I'm thinking mainly of Halloween and The Thing, but Brad introduced me to Big Trouble in Little China, which is just an absolute joy. Not a horror movie, but still fantastic. But this is so interesting as far as his filmography, and I didn't know much about The Fog. I vaguely recalled when I was thinking about it, and the reason I thought about it is because the 4K was just released by Shout Factory, who are not sponsoring this episode, and
strangely enough,
and should be considering it. But they released a new 4K edition of The Fog, and I was like, isn't that John Carpenter? Oh, John must have seen this. And I reached out to you, and you were like, I actually haven't. And it's just crazy. This is the film that was like, for 3 years in a row, it was actually 4 years. So it was Halloween in 78. Then it was this one in 80, I think. And then 81 was Escape from New York. And then 82 was The Thing. So go ahead.
And then 83 was Christine. 84 was Starman. Right. 86 was Big Trouble in Little China. 87 was Prince of Darkness. 88 was They Live. And then it goes 4 years. Then he takes a 4-year break, and he did Memoirs of an Invisible Man. Was that the one with Chevy Chase?
Yeah, I do remember seeing clips of that as a kid. That's a movie that, not that I haven't like not like what we're talking about where you're so traumatized, but I do have odd memories of that film for some reason. Very striking memories. I remember Chevy Chase being invisible and shouting as he's running invisibly. There's just, I think, a cat bouncing. He goes, Jesus Lord, what have they done to me? And he runs into a wall. And as a kid, I thought that was funny. I was like, the guy ran into a wall. There's nothing funnier than that when you're however old I was, 6, 7.
The only thing that would have made it funnier at that age is if he farted as he ran into the wall.
I wish
that would have been high comedy.
You should have been in touch with Mr. Carpenter. I think you could have elevated that film.
I could have just snuck into
just a wee bit.
Snuck into the sound mixing booth and just laid one track and just like run out really fast. But keep in mind, he also directed a TV movie about Elvis starring Kurt Russell that came out in 1979.
Wow.
Which is why it's so funny to, longtime fans of Kurt Russell, that when he has a music scene in Christmas Chronicles as Santa Claus, it was like, oh yeah, okay, he's getting back to his roots, because there's nothing that Kurt Russell does that's bad. Like
I was going to say, there's nothing he can't do. Exactly. I think it's incredible that, as a fan, but even for myself, I'm really excited to see this because of like trying to make that bridge from this to the films of the early 80s that he did. And because this is the follow-up to Halloween, and Halloween is such a game changer as far as horror is concerned, like, what's the follow-up to that? What do you do, and how inventive do you have to get? And of course, the film, when it was first released, was not a success critically, financially. I don't know if it did that well either. I think it did it made $21 million on a $1 million budget. So it did very well, but was not well received, which I think is the case for a lot of films Carpenter did following Halloween.
Very true. And that's the funny thing. I'm glad you say that, because even The Thing was basically a flop.
Yeah.
And Escape from New York that's a cult darling. That was not warmly embraced by critics. Right. But Carpenter has always been in that zone. And what's really weird is I can't figure out why Halloween, of all of them, is the one that's the outlier. Horror movies have always tended to be, that's just schlock. You put that off to the side, because it gets credit with, giving birth to the slasher genre as we know it. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 74, Black Christmas in 74, those are trailblazers. They're sort of forgotten because Halloween made such an impact. And it's just weird. It's crazy that's the one. And so I'm honestly going into this knowing that it wasn't as successful as Halloween, but so few things could be. I want to look at this, and I want to know, like, what's the magic sauce that's missing, because I know from the trivia on IMDb that he chose to shoot The Fog with like Panavision lenses to make it look like a bigger and bigger budget production than it was. And that was his whole sort of approach to it. And so he was obviously thinking in terms of setting himself apart and saying, okay, I'm going to use equipment that makes it look grander than, my very low budget movie over here. I'm going to visually communicate to the audience that I've graduated to the next level. And it was anamorphic widescreen Panavision is what he shot it in. So like, that's a huge decision right there. And so I'll be really interested. Like, do I see an actual visual, move forward? Do I see something that indicates somebody who's grown in some way? And I don't know. I'm looking it up right now. I don't know who Dean Cundy is the cinematographer on this.
I was going to say,
it's got to look gorgeous.
It's the same creative team that has worked with him on many of his best films, if not all of them. But it's like you said, Dean Cundy, and I think Deborah Hill wrote this with him, and it was edited by the same Charles Bornstein and Tommy Lee Wallace co-edited it. And try to say that. Just everyone.
It's
out
a
there,
tough word. I try to avoid
co-edited it. Just I want to take a moment. But they did Halloween, and I think they did The Thing as well, and Escape from New York, and a couple others. But it's the same team, and I just wonder. Critics like to hype themselves up, or they, when they're basking in their own egos or own sense of self-worth, like to think that they are ahead of the game. But what I think John Carpenter's career proves is, somebody thinks they've got you pegged, and when you wiggle out of that role that they've pegged you in, so Halloween is like the low-key slasher, very understated, very creepy, unsettling, and maybe this is a little bit more overblown, maybe a little bit big, like, they're thinking small scale, and this is going all out with effects, the same things that they held against The Thing for like being very dark and nihilistic and all these things. I just wonder if it's like, this is just another example, because again, there's been a critical reevaluation of The Fog where it's held in higher regard. People love this movie, like Joey and other people I know are big fans of this film. It ends up in a lot of favorite horror films. And it's just interesting because, to your point, it's like The Fog is something that I feel, Halloween and The Thing are the ones you hear a lot about. And The Fog will pop up, but usually closer to the bottom of the list. No, like, not a knock against it, but it is one of those ones that doesn't seem to fall into the essential viewing for a lot of people. So it's like, on one hand, it'll be interesting to watch this as a follow-up, as just completely without like living in that day and time and knowing the critical reception of it, watching it with fresh eyes and kind of looking at it as, how does this work in his development as a filmmaker, but also what didn't work about this in terms of really connecting to critics of the time, or like, why wasn't it hailed as such at the time? And even now, why does it kind of fall under the radar? Is it just that he refined his technique for The Thing, and with Halloween he kind of, struck gold with that, and like just really made it work, all the elements work, and where, it's like the sophomore album that's not quite as good as the first one, but is interesting enough to merit listening to a third album.
I will actually say that it could, what I'm hoping it winds up as is like Strange Days by The Doors, which is their sophomore album, which people had that sort of reaction where they're like, it's good. But if you, especially once you're a fan, you actually listen to it, you're like, this is a really strong, what's up with everybody? Why are they kind of down on this? Like, this is a lot of gold on, being laid down here. Or if you want to keep in the realm of film, and this is where possibly everybody calls me, Crazy John for this, but it's like Magnolia.
I mean, I certainly will.
Well,
I'll call you
Crazy
should.
John.
Yeah.
But it's like Magnolia, Paul Thomas Anderson. I adore that film.
Yeah.
But it was not warmly embraced when it was released because everybody was still coming off of the Boogie Nights high.
Yeah.
And Magnolia is a completely different feel.
And also, like, understandably, its ambitions could be seen as pretentious. And I love, this is coming from somebody who loves Magnolia. I haven't seen it in years, but for a long time, I considered it my favorite of his films. You can see almost like the critics of Magnolia and maybe of this film, maybe wanting to relish what they perceived as a failure. Like, guess he doesn't have it this, I think that happens many, many times in many filmmakers' careers.
Like with The Game from David Fincher.
Yeah.
Where you watch that and you're like, what? Why wasn't anybody hotter on this when it came out? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. It's kind of a curveball, but it works. It works in the grand scheme of things, with perspective, with seeing where Fincher's career went. I don't know. I think this may be an example of that. This may be an example of like when John Carpenter now has a legacy. He's firmly cemented himself as one of the greats. People can go back to this film and say, oh, you know what? I completely missed it. And that's why it's kind of risen up.
I hope we're not building it up too much. I hope we're not building it up too much, because we're obviously going into this with high hopes. But you always love to ask, but I'm going to turn the tables on you because I love to turn tables on people. So I'll ask you because I'm curious.
Okay.
I kind of know. I kind of know what this movie is about. What do you think The Fog is about?
I'm gonna say The Fog is about it's a small town. There's a single mom trying to raise her kids. And she's just
so it's Gilmore Girls so far.
She has a tough time. She has a tough time, and there's like a police officer who's down on his luck and maybe a drunk, and there's a small town, nothing ever happens here, and then like people start disappearing, and the weather is unusually foggy. It's usually so sunny and clear, and now there's a fog, like it's just foggier and cloudier and muggy, and that, and then strange things start happening, and in the midst of all of this, this gruff policeman and this broken-hearted woman find love with each other. The fog takes many things away, but it brings them together, and that's The Fog.
You add a telekinetic child and you've got Stranger Things. There you go.
Yeah. Pretty much. I think I am ripping off Stranger Things. Absolutely.
No, for all I know, we're about to find out an inspiration point for it. Be like, damn, they stole from this too.
Yeah, I'm sure they did, but we'll find out. We'll see.
All right,
let's get to it, and we'll be back to discuss.
Now available to own on video cassette.
And we're back. John, I'll ask you first, since you do share the namesake of this director. I feel it's only fair.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
How do you feel about the 1980 feature film, The Fog?
How do I feel
about
The Fog?
Tell me everything.
I'm going to take a real long time to tell you how I feel with very little happening and let you know how I feel about The Fog. I'm going to be dead honest. I was so disappointed. I was so incredibly disappointed.
I'm on the same page. Yeah. So I want to know, I was trying to figure out, first and foremost, I am on the edge of my seat. I want to know what scene scarred you as a child.
Scene at the end where Hal Holbrook is holding up the cross. I remember seeing that as a kid. And when the Dread Pirate Roberts puts his hand on the cross, that's what I remember. So
okay, great. Gotcha. I was trying to figure out, because, and again, this is, as I said in the first part of this episode, I was the one who was horrified by Ghostbusters and thought that was a traumatic horror film. So I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but it was difficult to figure out, because the monsters themselves, on the one hand, they're pirate zombies, or they're zombie pirates. That's not very terrifying, but the shots where they're in silhouette and they're backlit, and they don't use the glowing eye effect as much as they should. I think that's incredibly effective and understandable how that could be like nightmare fuel. It's not utilized as much as it should be.
There's a lot that's not utilized as much as it should be, and I'm forever going to be very, very interested, because like supposedly a whole third of the movie was reshot after they screened a rough cut and they were dissatisfied, which blows my mind, because I also read a stat that they shot the whole thing in 30 days. So I'm like, how do you reshoot a third of the film
Yeah.
And like, what was your original schedule? Like 15?
And it's not like, this is not Back to the Future where they have all that Spielberg money, or essentially Spielberg standing over their shoulder and saying, do whatever they want. I support them. Let them reshoot the whole movie with Michael J. Fox. This is it was a $1 million movie. So it was maybe, I don't know, compared to Halloween, I don't think that's much more.
If memory serves, Halloween was something like $300,000. Like it was some, I mean, you adjust for inflation and blah, blah, blah. But like, yeah, it was something.
There's a jump.
A third of this. Yeah.
There's a jump there, but it's not this is not a big budget movie by any means.
No,
so it's like, I guess, he did have some sway since Halloween was such a big hit to be like, no, I want to, we've got to go back and do this. And maybe they just looked at it and they were like, yeah, this is a problem. Carpenter, even the finished product, I was reading because I was like, this doesn't quite work. And I was actually, there's some directors who were like, I still love it, but he's been pretty straightforward and been like, yeah, not my best work.
Which is admirable. You always want honesty in your artists and everything. The thing that's really wild to me about it is there was this, I don't know, this pacing sense where somehow it's an hour and a half long, but it feels much longer. And it's because they're like, oh, hey, we're going to spend 6 minutes watching somebody walk to a lighthouse. And it's like, yeah, I don't know if, we need to stretch that way. And the vibe I got from it was the Halloween TV cut where they had to like shoot stuff for stuff that had to be, they had to pull parts of the movie out because it's on TV. And so they shot these scenes that filled in, and it's the same sort of pacing thing where like you see this flashback of Loomis. I don't think it's flashback, or anyway, Loomis talking to the medical board about keeping Michael Myers locked up, and like you can sense the guy standing behind the camera going like, "Stretch it out,
yeah,
as much film as we can."
Well, that is something that I think that is not a mistake that the film feels that way, because apparently it was too short. And so he kept trying to find ways to pad the length. Like it was trying to get it to that 90-minute mark. And you feel it from the very first scene where you have this. I just was like trying to wrap my head around the scene of the old man telling the kids the story of the boat. And, he's telling it to them. And, maybe as like, a minute long scene of like, no one knows what happens. And then we do the same, panning up shot, which is really cool. That transition to the skyline of the city or whatever it is. And that could have been fine. But the scene, I think, goes on for 5 minutes, probably.
Yes.
Like not an exaggeration. And it's just this guy saying, there's ghosts out there. Be careful. And it's like, okay. And the whole movie, almost every scene, I think where the movie fails, as far as if you're trying to build tension or like a sense of dread, a great example is Alien, where you just have this sense of dread. You have very engaging characters. You have very engaging production design. And it does a great job of painting the picture for you. Jerry Goldsmith's score is great. And this movie, great soundtrack, but the movie fails in that almost every single scene is just kind of telling you things that it's like, oh, there's a terrible fog and it looks like these people got killed. It's like, well, we know all this. It took you 20 minutes to figure out something that we already knew. And every scene feels like that.
Yeah, every scene does feel like that. And I even came right out of it thinking to myself, how could this have been, more suspenseful, and maybe even had the story make a little more sense and have a little more dread to it? Because, the way it is, 6 must die. And like instantly the heartless part of myself went, all right, throw 6 people in front of the fog, right? Whole town saved.
Yeah.
All right.
Just take a vote and,
I'd be fair. I'd be fair in my assessments of who to throw at the fog. But like reconstruct the whole thing so that it's like the fog comes and like some people die and the fog and so like there's this, it happens over the 100 years where somebody gets snatched in the fog and it's not a pattern that anybody can follow or anything like that. And you come to find out all of this stuff about what the origin of the fog is and the sins of the past coming back to haunt you and everything.
Yeah, they kind of reveal that immediately. There's the guy, the priest finds the journal and is reading it very, very slowly, and there's apparently I can't repeat this verbatim on this family-friendly show. But apparently, if you pause it and just go to IMDb and look at the trivia, because there's this amazing snippet where apparently you only see it for a split second, but the first page of the journal is just covered in like a prop guy like venting and very angry about his job, and like, I went to 4 years of college, and using very colorful expletives and innuendos, and it's fantastic. So you have that. That's nice. But it's just like we know exactly what it is. And then I was reading Roger Ebert's review, and he said something I totally agree with, which is that in theory, in concept, I see how this movie could work and be creepy, but in execution, at least the way it's executed in this film, it just doesn't work as a threat. And it's like I said, in some cases, the design of the creatures, the pirates, the zombie pirates, is effectively unsettling. But you see them almost right away, and it's like, this isn't like a Pirates of the Caribbean thing, is it? It's, oh no, it is. And it kind of just robs, really, it really robs it of an actual threat. It just feels cheap.
This would be a great, like, 1 hour long in like an episode in a like a Tales from the Crypt sort of thing. Like have a 45 to 50 minute piece. This story works with that, right? It's got the whole Stephen King-y metaphor thing going on and everything.
Absolutely. I was gonna say, it feels like one of those real cheap Stephen King made for TV adaptations. And it's funny, I just read Salem's Lot for the first time, and I was getting similar vibes from I was like, well, Salem's Lot came out in what, 1973, 75, so that predates this. And it definitely seems like John Carpenter was a Stephen King fan, because there are a couple things that are almost like the two characters, Tom Atkins, so that was exciting. I was like, Tom Atkins and he and Jamie Lee Curtis are making out. The star of Halloween 1 and the star of Halloween 3. This is amazing. That was my favorite part of the entire movie, is that. But that relationship feels a little like the romance in Salem's Lot.
Is the one in Salem's Lot that quick? Really?
Well, so it's basically a Stephen King story without any of the character development.
Exactly, which is really pesky and takes up a lot of time. Although, gosh, maybe this movie could have, look, the thing is, I don't want to spend like the whole time just curb stomping the thing, because like you said, the score is good. This is a creepy score.
Yes. And there's good stuff. There's good stuff in the movie. There's a lot of there is creepy imagery. I think if you look, I remember seeing the screenshot of one of the zombie pirates standing in the fog with the red eyes, and I was like, oh, this is going to be creepy. And at the beginning, I thought it was going to be a little bit more creative, and it was trying to do like a real time thing. Like, this is all going to take place in a single night. Because when I think the radio DJ, I don't remember her name. Let me pull up trusty Wikipedia. Stevie. Stevie Wayne, played by Adrienne Barbeau. And I think she says something like, oh, we've got an hour to go, or something. She says something like that. And I was like, oh, we're 15 minutes into the movie. It's like an hour, 15 minutes long, or hour and a half. So this will all take place over a single night, which could have been an interesting device. But I guess he'd just done that with Halloween, and maybe he didn't want to go in that direction again.
Yeah. But I also think that, I don't know, maybe this is just a better type of story for the page, right? Like, because the story you're talking about, I can instantly picture it. It would be great to have this story simply from her point of view. And she's trapped in the lighthouse and she doesn't know what's going on, and people are calling into the radio station and stuff like that. That's a really
compelling story. It is. You can see that as like a great Stephen King novella or something, like a short story that's just very effective. And I think a lot of it has to do with what the idea of fog as a threat evokes in your imagination. When you see it on the screen, you're like, all right, this isn't quite working for me. And I just get the sense of him being like, okay, we got to throw some like guys with blades and chopping people's heads and necks and things like that, but it just doesn't work. But on the page, like in your situation, there's a radio DJ, doesn't know what's happening. There's something like there's a fog coming through. All she can see is the fog, and people are freaking out and calling into the, things like that. Why would you call into a radio station as you're being brutally murdered by a fog? I don't know, but you know what? Who cares? Let's make it happen. I'm into that version of this story because it limits it to a specific perspective, and on the page, I can just see it working better. But here we're introduced to a lot of characters, none of whom are particularly interesting or likable, and we spend a lot of time with them before anything starts happening. And you would expect that to mean, oh, we're spending time with them because we get to know them. No, we just spend a lot of time with them kind of figuring out very slowly what we know already.
Very slowly.
I think it makes sense that they had that early reveal of the zombie pirates at the beginning, because you need that horror set piece, because otherwise you've got nothing. But it does rob the film of its reveal of them later on. You just lose that feeling. You know exactly how these people died. It kind of takes away the suspense, but I can see that being one of the reshoots where you just know it's like, we've got to put a kill earlier on because this movie just is just dead without it.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about it, and what I think supports your take on it, because there's like nothing's really been solidly said, but like Carpenter doesn't do gore, really. He's never really done gore. And these pirates being put in there feel like somebody who is backed in a corner trying to get something in there, who doesn't want to do the really gory stuff. And so I feel that,
he apparently wanted a PG for this movie, and it still got rated R. And honestly, I don't know why. There's no blood in the movie.
Yeah.
It's,
well,
I mean,
there's
there's even like, there's not even like, the two, the romance, they are in bed together, fully clothed. I think Tom Atkins has his shirt off, but Jamie Lee Curtis is very clothed. So it's very clear, like, Carpenter was pushing for a PG rating. So it's interesting that it got an R rating regardless. And I don't know if it's because there are a couple shots of like, some blades chopping up some people, but it's pretty, I mean, you don't really, the guy gets his eyes gouged out,
but you don't really see
you don't
that.
see it. Exactly. But yeah, so I don't know. I feel like, Poltergeist a few years later is more gory than this, and that's a PG rated film.
Honestly, maybe, I don't know. This is why this really feels like a TV thing that's stretched out, where it's like, this very much feels on that smaller
scale. Even, the Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake from 1978 was also PG and also had more violence and more nudity than this movie. So again, I don't know if they were just like, oh, this is the guy who did that Michael Myers movie, we're gonna,
that's true,
and they just stamped it with an R. But
no, see, the thing is, I was going to throw out there, I was like, oh, maybe it's because a kid is in peril. But I mean, you mentioned Poltergeist. I mean, good grief.
Right.
The kid, like, that's the whole driver of the movie right there.
Exactly. So. I also, I kind of wanted this, and again, I think it's the same thing as like why he didn't do it all in a single night, because he likely didn't want to get pigeonholed into like, oh, he's the horror director that does single night events. And then Invasion of the Body Snatchers, as I mentioned, which I love the remake, the 1978 remake to be specific, so much. And that was just a couple years before that. But I feel like this could have really benefited from a little body snatching. There was a part of me that I thought they were going there, because the guy who gets his eyes gouged out suddenly comes back to life and then just falls over before he does anything.
Except to scratch the number 3 into the tile.
Yes, he scratches the number 3. And that's it. And I thought, I was like, how cool would it be to have, Invasion of the Body Snatchers has everybody like screaming and pointing. This would have been great to have, like, you have this small group of survivors. You have the Stevie, the radio DJ, in her tower, like reporting to them what's going on. And then you have the whole town being kind of inducted into by the fog. Like the fog is like murdering them and taking them over. You don't necessarily need the pirates with the scythes and like things like that.
Well, the thing is, like, you know, with all that sort of thing, I think another limiting principle on any sort of terror you're going to feel is it's pretty implied, you know, it's only going to be 6, and it seems to be people who are descended. Like, it's not clear, but it seems to be people who are descended from the 6 who conspired or whatever. And it's like, again, once I grew up and realized that Michael Myers was never going to leave Haddonfield, I was like, oh, I don't live there. Problem solved.
All right, good to go.
You know, and I don't go camping. So, you know, Jason, you're out of luck too, unless I move to New York or go to space. But, you know,
I think the fog's threat is kind of robbed by your point, like what you're saying. Like, it's just these 6 people, and that's
right.
it. It's like, oh, so when I see the fog, I'm not going to be kind of creeped out by it. Or like, you know, when you go to the beach, you know, you're thinking of Jaws, and it's like, oh my God, that shark is terrifying. It's not quite the same when the fog, like if the shark is as in Jaws the Revenge going after the Brodies specifically, it's just, you know, it baffles the mind in so many ways. But in this case, the fog, it's not clear about what its threat is, and then it's inconsistent. Like, it's like, okay, then why did you murder the old babysitter?
Yeah,
that was one of my favorite kills, because she's like, first of all, everyone in this movie is stupid. They all open the door for the guys. Wow, the fog's here. I'm going to open this door.
Who could be knocking on the door so late at night at 11:30?
She's like, I'm going to check this out. This supernatural fog. You know what? I got this. I'm going to open the door and go outside. But the best part is just the way she's like, go back into your room. And he's like, but I want to see who's out there. And she goes, go back. And the thing comes up behind her. It cuts to the kid going, all right, and closing the door, and she immediately and then you just see the guys like stabbing her, and it's hysterical.
It feels, that part plays a bit like a Monty Python skit.
It really does. It does. It has the comic timing and the editing. Not that it's bad, but it's like the way it's cut just emphasizes how funny that moment is. Like the kid, I want to see. No, you go back to your room. Okay. Like he happens to, the way they cut it is he turns around as she's getting murdered, and it's just so funny.
Yes, it is.
It is. It's hard to really get invested in these people. One, because as we said, we don't know who they are. And two, like, so again, bringing it back to Salem's Lot, there is a preacher, a religious figure who is an alcoholic, although again, it's not fully clear. He's kind of like, at the beginning, he's like, I'm crazy. And then he has his wine bottle again later on, and Tom Atkins is like, get that out of here, and throws it away. And he's like, you're right, I won't be an alcoholic anymore. And I'm like, were you an alcoholic? What's going on? That also felt very pulled from Salem's Lot. But it's like, you know, The Exorcist has a very moving story about a priest basically recovering who's lost his faith, trying to recover his faith. And, you know, that's a compelling arc to display. And this movie has no arc for that character or any characters really. And,
when you said
you could argue that for Halloween, but I think Halloween is so effective in its simplicity, you don't need it. But here you need it because you spend so much time with these people.
But yeah, I mean, to go back to the aforementioned Halloween yet again, but like, that's a one night thing. You're not expecting much of your character's arc in that situation. You're not expecting, you know, Dr. Loomis to put his demons at rest. Like it's all about that entertainment and that scare at the end. But yeah, there's nothing to hold on to with these characters. Like it really is where I would say you could argue it's successful is that it feels like those pulpy 50s things.
It really does. Yeah.
So if that's director's intent, awesome. He did it. Does it work as a film? That's where I'm going to sort of step aside and be like, I don't know. There's an argument here.
What did work for you?
Okay. Well, the red eyes worked.
I know I said this already. I don't know why they saved that until the very end of the movie. It should have been.
Know. I mean, in all honesty, when the creatures showed up, it works. When they're investigating the boat, it kind of works. Right?
The body falling out.
The body falling out is perfect. But like, yeah, I don't know.
The cinematography is great. Like the lighting, lighting is much more zany is not the right word, but there are a lot more colors. Like, you know, Halloween is very autumn tinged, very kind of fall oriented to give you that kind of feel of the season. And this is like, there are lots of colors. There are blues, there are reds, there's very dramatic lighting. And I'm thinking the reason I thought of this is because the scene on the boat with the guys being taken out is actually relatively effective in its lighting. It's like it's very good. And I like whenever there are a couple great shots of like the silhouette of these ghosts or whatever they are. Particularly I'm thinking of the one where they're in the truck and they just rescued the kid and they're trying to get away and they're stuck in the mud, and you see out of the driver's side window, there's all of a sudden you see the silhouette, the way it's lit, it reveals it. There's some, I mean, it showcases the talents of this amazing team of people, but it doesn't, like, the story is not there to support that talent. It's almost like, you know, I don't know. Like, it's just like, you know, sometimes you can say, oh, well, this person wrote the script and that person maybe ruined it. But it's like, in this case, it's the same. It's John Carpenter. It's Deborah Hill.
Yes. Well, I mean, Carpenter doesn't have, he doesn't bat 1,000 through his career, let's say, but like a more sensible arc, in all honesty, is that this seems in some weird way like the movie that should have come before Halloween. Because like you're saying, you can tell there's real talent at work here. This is how you would have expected his arc to go, right? You go to Dark Star, you go to this, you go to Halloween. And instead Halloween came first. And I think it really is just the fact that they were already at that point that they needed to be. Yeah, I mean, maybe it was just like that lightning in a bottle, like the runner hitting his stride right at the starting gun, and then, you know, a misstep.
Just overthinking. And it is what we were talking about in part one, which is that sophomore slump feeling of like, you're kind of treading water, you're kind of not really going anywhere. The talent is still there, but it's just the lack of story. And it's unfortunate because I don't know, I think of The Thing, which is, again, it's not that John Carpenter's strong suit is like character development. It's more of like the casting and the character types, because it's the same in The Thing. You have these very, very specific characters, very well cast, and it just works. And I think the setting works, the threat works, because it's so horrifying on so many levels. And these guys are very isolated, very alone, and it just feeds into the terror a little bit better. And it does a much, much better job of building the sense of dread, because you almost from the get-go know something is wrong, and it's paced so much better. So this feels like a necessary stepping stone to get to The Thing. Like, I think there are, well, I guess I'd throw that as a question to you. What lessons can Carpenter, or what lessons do you think The Fog taught him that he took with him moving forward in his career?
Oh my gosh. See, that's tough, because script writing is never like the strongest suit for Carpenter. More focused storytelling, develop it a little bit more before you film it.
Pacing.
Because I mean,
Pacing.
But I mean,
great villain. Have a great villain.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, seriously, it's like, this is only 2 years after Halloween. Like, that's too fast. Maybe it's just he was already more interested in Escape from New York and was just like getting past this. Who knows?
The Fog notwithstanding, we have some really great films that lead to The Thing, and like, that's pretty impressive. And The Thing is everything this film isn't. It's horrifying. It's compelling. It's exciting.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's just it. Maybe this is what taught him what not to do with The Thing. And so this does get directly applied 2 films later.
I would love to hear his commentary on the film.
Yeah.
But based on what I was reading and like some of the stuff he said about it, it seems he kind of acknowledged like, yeah, this is not one of my stronger efforts. And you can see maybe it was biting off more than he could chew. Like maybe he just kind of jumped into it thinking like, I'll figure it out. Halloween was a hit. I know what I'm doing. And then it's the 1941 Spielberg situation where Spielberg was basically like, I can do no wrong. And then he goes very, very wrong. And it kind of course corrects him and sort of puts his ego in check. Maybe The Fog is a necessary misstep so he can kind of be humbled and sort of like respect the process, respect the storytelling a little bit more than he had. Or maybe it just like, again, he, I think, described it as like great concept, like the idea of fog as a threat is creepy. And it's like, you can see visually in your head, if you're thinking about it, it's like, oh yeah, I could see how this could like the fog. Oh yeah, that sounds really interesting. But I think he realized that he couldn't quite land the vision. And maybe he was trying to, the train was getting ahead of the tracks a little bit.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Any other major things that stand out about this? It's such a disappointment. And it's just, I think because it is bookended by 2 masterpieces of the genre, it makes it really, really hard to look at it as anything other than a stepping stone. And I know there are people who love this movie and who see it as like a hidden gem. But I don't know. I don't see this being one I revisit and say, yes, now I understand.
I think that some of it has to do with people seeing it as a kid like I did. So like, I almost wish I'd never seen this because I would have always treasured the memory. But,
it's up to me to ruin everything about your life. So,
but I mean, the thing is, it's like to speak to that there are people who love it. Mutual friend of the show, Joey, he loves this movie. It's one of his favorite horror movies.
Oh, Joey's gonna hate this episode.
He is, and he's gonna hate me. But I kind of prepped him for it.
Send me nasty messages.
Probably so, but that's just because of how you felt about Twin Peaks season 3.
That's true.
Yeah.
To me, in Carpenter's film, in his filmography, it is the stepping stone that is a lesson learned, and there's some really cool stuff in it. There's some very impressive filmmaking on display, but it's just in service of a movie that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, at least they dusted themselves off and
kept
rocketed through the 80s.
That's it. So that's the lesson. If at first you don't succeed, keep trying. Eventually, you too will make the thing. You could be on your way.
Although let's keep in mind that this is a movie that was a financial hit. And we're dragging it like this. So
that's true. So
what do we know?
We don't know anything, clearly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess final ratings. I just want to do what's her name's? How many Kobrits? Is that the old lady's name?
Yes.
How many Kobritzes, Mrs. Kobritzes, do you give The Fog on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest?
But see, the thing is, now you've driven me toward the lowest possible number I can give it, because I don't want poor Mrs. Kobritz to have to go through that too many times. So,
as you see,
poor
my
woman.
plan, you figured it out, John, per usual.
I'll be honest. When it first ended, I was like, oh, there's a lot, they knew what they were doing. They photographed well, all these sorts of things. Maybe I'll give it a 3. Then I sat with it for a little bit. I'm like, yeah, really 2.5 is sort of our ceiling here. And just through this conversation, I got to land at a 2. This is a 2 out of 5.
I would say I'll give it the 2.5, but I felt the same way. It was like it ended and I was like, well, that wasn't bad. And then it was kind of like, well, but it wasn't very good either. And I just, I know it's not fair to hold it up against The Thing. Carpenter is a more experienced filmmaker by that point, and a more experienced storyteller. But I just kept thinking, I was like, there's no way I'm going to go to this as my choice John Carpenter Halloween season viewing. Like,
nope.
I'm going to watch Halloween. I'm going to watch The Thing. And then this just feels like something you put on in the background of another room while the party's going on somewhere else.
Well, let me ask you, you've seen all of Carpenter's other 1980s movies, right?
Not all of them. No.
Let me guess.
I haven't seen Escape from New York.
What?
Yeah.
Why, Shawn?
That could be a future missing frame.
I
we
think
may
it
have to
needs
get
to be.
Mr. Gullickson on for that one too.
Oh, come on, Brad. Come back
Do you
on
think
the show.
here's the other real question. Do you think Brad likes The Fog?
Oh,
I
are
feel
you
like
kidding?
he does.
This
I
is a
feel like he
5-star
does.
for Brad.
This is a 5-star film
Yeah.
for Brad, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, John, tell the good people at home about all the wonderful things you're doing at the Nerd Party and elsewhere.
You can find me here on the network co-hosting 2 shows. One is Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast that I co-host with Matt Rushing. And the other one is House Lights that I co-host with Darren Moser and Tristan Riddell, where we look at the works of directors through different crazy categories, including James Bond directors, which I know you're listening to that one, right, Sean?
Oh, my God. Guy Hamilton. He's
Yes.
a hero to all.
He is a hero to all, but, is he really a John Glenn? I don't know. Maybe you have to tune in to House Lights and find out.
There
But
you go.
and I guess everybody knows where they can find you elsewhere, right?
Maybe. I don't know if they want to. But I am on Twitter at YayShondorman. I am on Letterboxd, ShondorMan05. The fog is coming for us. I think it's if I look out my window, I can see it. It's on its way. It's not happy with this episode. And here's the thing. When they knock on my door, I just won't open it. And that's it. Problem solved. Don't let them into your house.
Okay, look, that's another problem, but that we didn't even touch on. But okay. Good enough. 2 out of 5. That's it.
2 out of 5, 2.5 out of 5. We're good. That's it. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening, and we will see you at the movies.